Today, what the US-China trade framework agreed at the very end of October 2025 has actually changed, what hasn't changed, and what American importers should do now. Stay with us. You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Hello, today we're covering the long-anticipated meeting between Presidents Trump and Xi Jinping, who met in South Korea on October the 30th, so just about a week ago. And the premise of meeting was trade talks, and the hope was that things would be settled down a bit. So today we're going to cover what was discussed, what came out of the talks, and Renaud's with me, and he's going to give some guidance based on what we know now that might help, especially if you're a US importer. So, hello, Renaud. How did you feel about this meeting? It was kind of picked up a lot in the press, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, well, long anticipated for sure. And Trump signed some agreements in with Malaysia, Vietnam, and I forgot, was it Thailand? Yeah, I think so. All of them around 20%, 19%. So everybody thought, well, he's in a agreeable deal-making mood, whatever, this is going to be good. And for several days before that, he had been, let's say, sending signals that he didn't want to fight with China, right? And so everybody was thinking, hey, okay, let's hope for something that stabilizes the situation and, if possible, resets the relationship, because it's, how to say, Trump from a distance can bark a lot and so on, but when he's in a face-to-face meeting with authoritarian strong leader in general, he he is very agreeable to whatever they like, right? So
Nicely put.
Yes.
Indeed.
So they say TACO, right? Trump always chickens out. That's the big joke, but it's true in front of a strong opponent anyway. So yeah, there was anticipation. Everybody was thinking, is something going to happen? In the end, not that much, but it's definitely something to analyze, I think.
Yeah, this is a topic that we keep coming back to because, of course, the talks are just one in a series of different activities regarding the US-China trade war that has been ramping up since Trump came back into office again. And yeah, it's kind of like, it's a bit like a Cold War at the moment because I think Trump works on a sort of carrot and stick basis, doesn't he? He's like, right, I'm going to threaten a lot of stuff and then I'll back down once somebody, falls more into the line that I want them to fall into. And basically, it kind of has been working with the exceptions of Russia and China, because everyone has sort of gone and said, okay, yeah, we'll accept whatever if you do a trade deal with us. Maybe we can add Canada to the list a little bit as well. I think Canada's certainly had a recent run-in with them. But I know the UK very quickly came to the table and said, sure, okay, and got a trade deal, for example. But a lot of other countries also in Asia, as you've mentioned, right? But China has held firm. But that's a problem because the trading relationship between the US and China, like it or not, is extremely huge and also extremely important for both countries, right? So having a trade war doesn't really benefit either country. But on the other hand, the Chinese, as you know, culturally, they're not going to react well to threats or to, bombastic words and bluster and things like that. They kind of just shut down. Right. It's just not the way to deal with the Chinese. And I think Trump maybe doesn't understand this or hasn't understood it yet, right? So what actually happened? You mentioned not a lot. I mean, look, there's a few things.
Yep.
I think in this news that are particular points. First of all, there's rare earths, which we've discussed fairly recently. In particular, that's things like magnets, which are used in many electromechanical products and things like that. In particular, an issue is in defense products. They require these magnets, and China have got a near monopoly on rare earths. So that's been a sticking point. This was discussed and there's been a change there. Tariffs, of course, Mr. Trump's favorite word, apparently. There have been some changes on the tariffs on China. And then I think agricultural, soybean purchasing from China was blocked, right? And that has now changed as well. And that's extremely
By
important
China.
for...
Yeah.
Correct.
So purchasing of agricultural products, in large part soybeans from US farmers, basically, right? Which is part of the electoral base of Trump. So the Chinese are hitting him where it hurts. They just stop buying anything from that group, right? For a while already, even though it was already part of the negotiations in the first term of Trump, right? So they say they basically stopped buying. The Chinese don't need to say things; they just do it. To just pass the directive, and then everybody just say, "Okay, we just stop buying from these guys." They don't need to have an official decree, right? But they committed to buying more, to resuming the purchase, right? What else did the Chinese agree on?
Well, some things have changed and some things haven't, right? So I mentioned the magnets / rare earth issue. So they've basically agreed to pause the export controls, which is what the Chinese call it, for around a year. So that means that there's probably less likely that there's going to be a sudden shock to that particular industry in terms of purchasing, where suddenly the Chinese say, no, that's it, export controls are back on, nobody's buying unless we say so. So that gives a bit of stability to buyers, and I'm sure a lot of listeners and certainly a lot of our customers are purchasing components, at least with these kinds of products in them, if not just the magnets themselves, I guess, right? So some tariffs have been relaxed by the states on China. This depends on the HS codes that are applied to products. So there's a list. I can give some examples a little bit later on, right? And I think the tone of how they're dealing with each other has softened, which means that hopefully it's going to lead to less roadblocks to doing business in the short term. But this is in the short term. Basically, we've got about a year of a truce in the trade war, and that gives that gives importers some more stability now. But as we know, it can change very quickly. And if there's something happens that makes Trump feel slighted and he suddenly gets pissed, he's going to be like, no, that's it. I'm going to put 100% more tariff on Chinese products or something like that. And if that happens, then the apple cart gets turned over, because of course the Chinese will just say, okay, fine, well then we'll reintroduce export controls and then we'll stop buying soybeans and all the rest of it. I'll go on to how the Chinese...
Maybe we can double click on some of that. I mean, so you said lower tariff is pretty much to 10% lower, 10 percentage points lower than what it was just before they met, right?
Yes.
Because this 20% supposedly as a punishment for not doing enough about fentanyl trade are now reduced to 10%. And this 20% used to apply to pretty much everything except some educational products and things like that. But it was very, very broad, very broad. So if we want to keep things simple, if you used to pay, let's say, for example, 54% tariff for something made in China and sold in the USA, it's 44%, right? Does it make a huge difference? Well, for a company that makes a margin on that and now suddenly has more margin, that can be the difference between life or death already, right? If the prices had been reset accordingly and so on. But that's something we'll discuss later. What do what do the buyers need to do? We'll discuss
Yes.
that. And something else, you say, well, they bought about 1 year truce. Yeah, it's the- I think we all know that it just means more stability than, before it was, hey, let's talk about it again in 90 days. And then, oh,
Mm,
we're not happy with their magnet controls, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we give them 1 month, otherwise it's going to be 100%, right? So this was
mm,
extremely, extremely hard on businesses, especially small businesses. Well, how do they manage all this, right? Where you know that the lead time to actually send a purchase order all the way to receiving the products, because the tariffs are limited, when the goods arrive, is often something like 3 months, right?
mm.
Or more. So how do you plan things? So at least now seems like they agree. Let's keep things more stable. Let's give the different businesses more time to plan ahead. So that's a good thing. We're seeing an increase in the inquiries from people who were, or companies that were thinking of investing into maybe developing a new product and things like that to be manufactured in China. A lot of things were on hold since basically Trump was elected, or at least since April, and things are getting unlocked little by little. So that's a that's a good thing for businesses that rely on this China USA collaboration, let's say, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
As well as tariffs, because you're right. I think
Mhm.
they basically said that there was some progress on fentanyl precursors, which the chemicals,
Mhm.
presumably different types of chemicals, are manufactured in China. Of course, they're not necessarily manufactured to make fentanyl, but once they are purchased and then put together by whoever's making fentanyl, then that's where the drug comes from, right? And so I guess they discussed this as a matter of urgency, and China has said, okay, fine, we'll try and control the precursors better. And that's led to the 10% drop in the fentanyl punishment tariff,
Yeah,
if you want to.
basically, I think the White House would like China to do export controls on that, not on
Yeah.
magnets. Right.
Mm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, that's
Yeah,
less likely to happen. But yeah, but
it was very
also another.
difficult. It's very difficult because you have, they send with a few liters of the certain chemicals, you can make doses for a lot of people, a fentanyl doses. So is it
Yeah.
really talking, and it's not necessarily liquid, right? It can be, some of them are probably solid. So it's very, very difficult to control that. I mean,
Well, I
yeah,
understand the Chinese point of view because they are not, maybe if you read media in America, some people might believe that China is just sending fentanyl to
right.
the US and that's killing people, but that's not
Mm.
the case.
Yeah, they think it's like 19th century Britain sending opium to China, right?
Okay, the less said about that, the better, I think. But yeah, there's a history lesson we can cover on a different podcast. But yeah, so
Right.
something like that. So I kind of understand why China are like, okay, we'll try and help, but it's
Mhm.
like if you send people components for anything, you are not then should you be held responsible for what they do with them? It's kind of very murky, isn't it? So another thing that's been extended though, there are these things called Section 301 exclusions, and I guess if you're importing or producing those products in the States and need components for them, you'll be sweating thinking, okay, these have been excluded from tariffs or, further payments up to now, but are they going to get thrown on the bonfire with everything else? So apparently they've been extended. And just to give you an idea of what Section 301 exclusions include, I mean, basically they're it's like important stuff, if I say it in short. So a lot of medical and diagnostic products like, blood pressure monitors, X-ray machine housings, ECG electrodes, ultrasound
Mm.
scanners, things like that, electromechanical and HVAC stuff. So you've got like vehicle climate system blowers, gas ignition safety controls, electronics and wiring, so LCD displays, things like that. Solar, a lot of stuff. So the components and products you need to produce solar, so silicon growth furnaces, machines that actually make the solar cells, things like that. So you can understand that these industries are growing, yet they're quite reliant on Chinese parts. So up to now, those parts or components or machines have been excluded. But who knows whether they'll, whether the administration will say, well, no, we're not going to buy them from China, so no big tariffs. But those have also been extended. So again, that's a non-exhausted list. I've just given a few examples, but these are important products. So anybody importing those as well can probably breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief in the short term. But again, they're always up for grabs. So yeah, so that gives you an idea of what's gone on, right? We've kind of had a bit of a reset, but it's not a complete reset. It's sort of partial and only for up to about 12 months. So is it groundbreaking? Yes, because they finally got together and had a cordial meeting, and I think the pressure has been ratcheted down a bit, which is useful. But is it a solution to the trade war? No. This story's got more to run, hasn't it? So in terms of what US importers should be thinking about or could be thinking about now. So yeah, how do we react to this news if we're a US importer?
Well, first you go back from I can only plan for the next cycle of purchases, to okay, now I can plan more according to, the seasonality of the demand and things like that. And also you you're you're a little bit less again in the short term scramble for okay, where should I manufacture my products? All right. Well, a lot of companies have been looking for alternative sources. Oh, this is made in China right now, but can I find suppliers outside of China? Can I push my current suppliers, Chinese suppliers probably, to make it out of China? Oh, they're making in Vietnam. Oh, but suddenly Vietnam has whatever, 49% tariff. Oh, now they're negotiating something, but right. Oh, now Vietnam is what? I forgot, 20% or 19%? Roughly 20%. Okay. How long is that likely to last? Probably relatively stable. Might be all the way until the end of Trump's term and maybe beyond, right? Okay. So that's the first thing. The time horizon for planning really changes. And people, yeah, a lot of people were scrambling and looking for ways and like trying to find some loopholes and trying to find some other HS codes and so on. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So a lot of people were trying to find other ways to move things out of China. Well, it depends. It really depends on, will all the components still come from China, right? So in the long term, does it really make sense to make things out of China? Okay. But in what way? Because there's so many other options, right? If the lead times, how to say, if you can plan long ahead, then it can make sense to have a long supply chain with components made in China, then, maybe semi-assembled and then shipped to another country. I don't know, Malaysia, India, some other place, maybe Mexico and so on. Then assembled there, maybe PCB assembly or something that really leads to, substantial transformation, as the US Customs Department says, and then ship it to the final market, right? And that adds sometimes 2 or 3 months to the lead time. It really needs to be planned on a case-by-case basis, but it leads to obviously extra logistics cost, right? Extra complexity. It goes through customs several times, so it adds some uncertainty. And of course, yeah, it adds a lot to lead time, as I mentioned. But in the end, if in China your product category comes on, I don't know, let's say 60% tariff, and the other country has only 10 or 20% tariff, it can make sense. It can lead to a lot of savings, but do you only plan based on that, right? So, for example, we're talking with customers that are interested. Oh, okay, India, why not? But India to them is interesting because it's a country with a relatively large and fast-growing middle class consumers, and it's not like every product is available in India. India has been rather conservative, and they have special requirement and BIS certificate and all these kind of things. But if you jump through the hoops and you do it, you can access a pretty, pretty affluent middle class and higher, where maybe your competitors are not present yet. And a lot of foreign brands are doing very well in India, right? So that's an example. Is it purely a sourcing strategy versus an overall business strategy where it can also relocating somewhere allows you to be close to a new market and to access a new market? Now that's interesting, right? That might really offset a lot of all the drawbacks. So I think that's really the big thing. Apart from that, I mean, look at your HS code. Keep checking, the past rulings of the US CBP. Keep checking all these kind of things. Of course, you need to understand the system and use the system to your advantage. All right, and if you've been buying, for example, DDP, and suddenly the tariffs goes down, well, are you going to ask your supplier to revise the DDP price? If it's a legitimate DDP price, delivered duty paid price, yeah, of course they should reduce it. If it's based on fraudulent declarations and blah 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 blah, well, you are exposed to risks, and you probably don't. Actually, you should just stop that. Maybe it's no longer worth taking this risk, right? Because you can't tell the customs that you don't know why the price of the tariffs was not reflected in the it's pretty obvious that there was a fake declaration, so this is not an excuse. Okay.
No. Would you
yeah
would you potentially look at holding some additional buffer stock of key components such as magnets that could be affected by export controls? I know companies don't want to put a load of money into holding tons of stock necessarily. That's not always going to be good, but for those in particular,
I'm sure a lot of companies are looking at that. So if you assemble, or if you do processing or assembly of your products outside of China, but it uses for example, a lot of magnets that are made with neodymium and so on. You might want to get some kind of stockpile somewhere in your supply chain outside of mainland China, or just in case, right? Because China knows that this is really a big weapon, a big stick that they can use to beat pretty much any other country into doing whatever they want. So this big stick might be used again at some point. Okay, and you might want to redesign your product, right? Not every product needs so many magnets and so much of such and such minerals in the end, right? You might find some other ways to do it and reduce your exposure, or even maybe not eliminate your exposure, because this is very, very, very basic kind of materials, right? Big companies have been looking for alternate sources that are mined and processed outside of China, but this is really a big company game, and I don't know
Yeah.
in the long term if China goes back to, okay, let's just make it very cheap so nobody else can economically do the processing, the mining and the processing. So basically we keep their industries at zero. I don't know how much of these other countries really be able to sustain their own domestic production of rare earths. I have no idea. We'll see. We don't really know.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just
Good. Yeah.
remember
Some
the
good
masks
tip.
and the masks and some
Yeah.
other medical materials, and everybody say,
Mm.
"Oh, we need to make that. We need to make that in the UK. We need to make that in the EU." Blah blah blah. And then as soon as the pandemic is over, and the hospitals and everybody they go back to their usual procurement approach of, hey, who has the lowest cost, and that's it. All the companies that thought,
Yeah.
hey, there's a good opportunity here, I'm gonna make it outside of China, basically gone bankrupt, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Because you can buy a mask machine and ship it to the UK,
Hmm.
but the person or people on that machine making the masks, first of all, they're going to be being paid what,
Hmm.
like, 5, 10 times more than a Chinese operator, maybe. I don't know. Right. That's, it might not be quite that much. And then you've got all the cost of the components as well, the materials. So, yeah, you instead of having masks for 5p, they're costing £2 each or something. So, of course, yeah, that's why it's not really you don't see European masks so much now.
Yeah, not so much, right? Right.
Mm.
Apart from that, uh, I don't know. Plans for the long term. The US is still on a trajectory of conflict with China.
Mm.
So, you know, in the long term, do you want your business to rely entirely on China, or do you want to have a backup somewhere else and a second source and so on for your key products, right? And that really depends from company to company. Maybe in your industry, everything comes from China anyway, and nobody has really found another way, a way around it. Uh, and maybe it's the opposite. Maybe you're the last one buying from China.
Yeah.
Right? So does it make sense? Yes, no. Are you in the
Mm.
same industry as Apple products? Right? Because it seems like Apple can always find their way out and have their own exemptions in their Trump. So in that case, maybe you can say that the risk is contained, and maybe you can edge by short selling some Apple stock, and then if if you get hit badly, then at least you make a bunch of money on the Apple stock that crumbles. I don't
Mm.
know, but anyway, there's ways maybe to edge your risk, right? This is obviously
Mm.
an extreme example, so a bit funny, but after that, it really depends. It's very much on a case by case basis, I think.
Yeah. Okay, good. So that gives you the rundown on the meeting and what's come out of it. Some positives, and then maybe kind of the equilibrium has been regained a little bit. I mean, Donald Trump said it was a 12 out of 10 meeting. So, in his usual language, I'm not sure if Xi Jinping would agree. If you saw the pictures, he didn't look super impressed. But I did, before we end, I did look at some Chinese reactions in the media, right? So, in Xinhua, Xi Jinping was quoted as saying, economic and trade should remain the ballast and driver of ties between the two countries. And there should be a
Mhm.
focus on long term cooperation and avoiding tit for tat. I think that seems reasonable to me. In the Global Times, the people at the talks said that the talks were candid, in depth, and constructive. And implementation's now moving to domestic procedures. That's typically sort of opaque Chinese sort of governmental language. But one interesting point they made was they will cooperate if reciprocal, but push back if pressured. And you don't normally get a lot of comments like that when it comes to trade talks with the US, but it shows that China, they're just not scared. So I thought that was quite interesting. And the Ministry of Commerce said about export measures on rare earths and magnets and things like that.
Mhm.
The export measures are lawful, targeted, and license based. They are managing risk. They are not bans. And, you know, this is risk for China because if we look at it from the Chinese point of view,
Yeah.
the risk is on their country. China is trying to develop and China is trying to look after itself. So if there's a risk to them, then they might not export, products that perhaps might be used in military applications by people that are threatening them, for example. Is that unlawful? Is it wrong? I don't know. I mean, again, it seems reasonable, I guess. But yeah, so that was a few quotes from the China side just to give a bit of balance at the end. But yeah, some good advice there, Renaud. And because this is an ongoing story, I wouldn't have thought this is the last time we'll discuss it. And anybody listening, if you do need help with your sourcing, you're thinking about India, Malaysia, redesigning a product, and some of the topics that we've discussed today, do get in touch. We can totally help with that.
Yep. All right. Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.